Welcome. I appreciate you joining me here today as I walk through the results of our budget structure and needs report. This is an industry research that Carnegie completed recently and an opportunity to kind of understand where does the industry stand today in the world of higher education's marketing and enrollment. My name is Jared Brickman. I'm the SVP of Research here at Carnegie. Did my doctoral work at Washington State University, and I've been with Carnegie for about 8 years. I love getting to the opportunity to do this type of research and also share results. So today's session is going to be about those results and how you can put those into action as an institution yourself. I'll also mention that because you are watching this, it is very likely that you were one of the people involved or had someone on your team that was involved in actually taking the survey that these results come from. And so at that, I would say thank you so much for your participation. We can only do this kind of research when we have willing respondents and folks who are kind of welcoming the opportunity to share their ideas with us. So thank you, thank you. And if you ever get another research request from us, I would always appreciate your input as we try and understand what really matters to the industry today. So let's talk about these things. Budget structure and needs report. What does this all mean? How did this work? So there's a little bit of background in the document. And importantly, if you haven't received this document and this webinar is the first you're seeing of this information, please let us know so we can get you the research document directly as well. But the big kind of reason why we do this is we often get asked by our institutional partners, where do we stand in a number of different things, be it the amount they're spending on marketing or what they're seeing in trends or how a particular department is structured. And while that isn't just obvious information that can be grabbed from anywhere, we do think that it is something that we can try and help the industry with by running primary research like this. So this was an online survey that was run last fall, so in 2024, and we ended up with 142 higher education professionals who filled out this research. So again, if you are one of those folks who took the survey, thank you. Thank you so much. And the rest of this document talks through the different trends and the things that we might recommend you keep an eye on in the industry. We also have some background about the actual sample itself. And so you can see, the number of surveys that were started, when this research took place, how we captured this was, an email invite. This is all opt-in. So for all you research hardheads out there, this is not a randomized sample. This is not a perfect sample by any means, but it is a nice quick snapshot of a variety of different voices from presidents to a lot of VPs for enrollment and marketing, some senior staff in those roles, as well as some respondents both from public and private institutions, institutions of varying sizes and locations. We really wanted to be able to kind of present some of this data broken out across different areas. Because the sample size is a bit smaller, again, we're not leaning on this to say this is the absolute truth, but it is a really helpful snapshot in understanding what these folks are thinking about and how it is we can help as kind of the industry moves forward, help each other in making really good decisions with all the uncertainty that is around. I will mention that this survey took place before last year's election. So, as you know, last year's election is November, so this closed out before that. I think a lot has happened since then that is probably going to influence some of the questions we talk about in trends. So we're going to be kind of on the lookout of gathering some of that information this year as well. We did release a recent report on the way that students and parents responded to what happened politically in the country through this last election cycle and some of their thoughts and kind of worries or some of their things that they think might be better based on kind of their political affiliations. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, please do search that out on the Carnegie website. But for what we're talking about today, we really want to think first about the trends and challenges that were most kind of apparent and most significant to folks last fall prior to that election. And we go about this research in two ways. You have both your qualitative open entry questions and your quantitative questions. And so when we do a qualitative question, primarily what you're going to see are different topics or themes that emerge from the data through repetition. We use something called grounded theory, which is a process by which you can kind of induce kind of information and valuable themes from a large subset of qualitative data. And what you can see here is that we have four key themes that this is talking about. So here, the question being the challenges in marketing specifically. So what are the biggest challenges for your institution's marketing function? And with this, you can now see the different themes written out, kind of summarized by our team, talking about when people speak to budget and staffing, these are some of the things that they care about. For example, budget and staff being a big concern, but also that it was often tied to, say, vendor pricing, inflation in the world, cost of generating leads, and all of these different pieces that kind of interrelate to the primary theme. You'll also notice that we pull some important quotes. So these are pulled almost directly. I say almost because we do clean up a little bit of grammar and spelling at times just to make sure everything is clear here. But it is a way for us to pull and kind of see or show how we are coming away with some of these topics and themes. So, standing out as a brand, someone's also talking about in the quotes about identifying a unique marketing position and differentiating itself from peer institutions. So you can kind of see how a quote like this is part of the creation of an overall theme, such as standing out as a brand. You can also see some of the other big challenges from the marketing side are technology and tactics, direction and prioritization. I think this one is, every institution probably talks about this a little bit where they have, this vision problem or this leadership problem or this unity problem where we're throwing a lot of strategies at the wall and seeing what sticks. So I think kind of coming to head with that is this idea that having this one unified vision can be really helpful and powerful when you are prioritizing your marketing needs. So that's how we do these qualitative questions. Because these are primarily just written on the screen, I'm not going to usually spend a whole lot of time on these pages, just kind of covering some of the top topics. I would definitely recommend you go through and read a little bit more about each of these themes as you work through the document. The other side of the coin then is quantitative measures. So we don't know always exactly everything that we want to talk about in a research study. That's why we have qualitative open entry questions. You can bring the topics to us. On the quantitative side, though, we often have certain questions where we want to have a specific set of answers for you to select from so that we can quantitatively draw and value some of these different outcomes. So here we have a question: in what areas of marketing do you need vendor assistance, if any? And there were 17 different areas listed. What you can see in this data output is the percentage of respondents who selected each of the options, whether it was no need, slight need, some need, high need, or critical need. We also then give an average on the scale. So pretend that no need is a 1 on a 5-point scale and critical is a 5. The average on the overall scale is a 3.39. So somewhere between some need and high need for this number one option here, which is market research. So you can see these are also ranked. And our final column is called a tier ranking. What this is it functionally buckets different options based on their overall score to say that statistically speaking, they may as well be tied. So the score for market research is 3.39. For digital ad placement, it's 3.28. From a statistical perspective, those numbers are close enough together that we would say they are functionally tied as far as kind of the need that people have. So this kind of shows you top need tiers versus those things which most institutions are going to say they have less need. For example, event management. Most of our clients, most of the respondents to this survey said that's not really something we need vendor assistance with. versus, say, athletics marketing, also down near the bottom, or internal comms. What is often asked about and is a place where vendor assistance is asked for is in kind of these top categories. And our first two tiers include market research, digital ad placement, and audience segmentation. And I do promise, as the person who runs market research at a vendor, I didn't make this up. I'm really excited to talk to any of you about your market research needs. That is something that I would always be happy to kind of assist with. But it also is pretty indicative of what we often see, which is this isn't necessarily something that we always have a whole lot of background in, or people have a whole lot of strong confidence in, is being able to do some of that on their own. One of the interesting findings of this, though, is that it didn't have the highest percentage of critical need. So it scored the highest overall, but digital ad placement is a place where there's actually more critical need, nearly 1 in 4 saying that is something critically important from the vendor side. So you can always kind of break out these types of results and understand them, not just from the overall average, but from the percentages of people who select each category. On the side of enrollment, we also looked at specific enrollment challenges. Budget and staffing came up again, though quite honestly less often. Here we really heard about demographic trends, the decline. I think we're all pretty well aware of what that means to a lot of folks and bringing up the demographic cliff and so forth. Financial aid, especially coming off the year with everything that happened with FAFSA, I think is not surprising as well to see this jump up on the enrollment side. Here we had 12 different service areas that we were asking about. And again, I promise I did not adjust these results to make market research look so great. But these are different things that folks have said that they need help with. I do think it's particularly interesting how much these groups are starting to focus in on retention. And so if your institution is thinking about how do we kind of think about retention as an everyone problem, I hear that a lot. I think this is an area to start to really kind of consider that when you're thinking through the enrollment team talking about retention tactics. I think that's a pretty cool way to start interrelating the different functions. Industry challenges. So this is more facing higher education as a whole. What are some of those things that are going to happen? The demographic shifts come up a lot again, but also this idea of the value and trust in higher education. Are people continuing to see a relevant ROI? Is there a feeling that there are many audiences now who don't understand the value of higher education? Lack of adaptability. Is the industry moving too slowly? As well as costs. Everything's becoming more expensive in our regular lives as well as our professional lives. And for students and parents, that is always a very high concern on the list. So how can we understand budget both from our internal needs as well as the needs of the potential audiences in the industry? We also asked, what are you doing to approach some of these issues? And so here, if you go back through each of the areas, we talked about some of the things that people are commonly doing. Here for the audience focus, for lack of students, I think audience focus has been a big change across the industry. More institutions adding online adult education options, evaluating where their markets are, and kind of expanding the idea of who they are serving and where they are serving has been a big piece of people saying, well, if we're going to lose our traditional demographics, we have to find something else to supplement that. But I imagine as the entire industry as a whole starts to do that, there's going to be more competition for all of those various kind of options. So understanding and knowing that it's happening quite often is something that you can kind of take away and understand that if you're not doing this as an institution, either you have been very lucky in your insulation and not needing to do this, but also that there may be other institutions that were not traditional competitors who may become competitors in the future for those demographics or those students that you have traditionally captured. Carnegie also has a list of industry trends that we watch. At the time, these were 12 of those trends that we had seen most commonly occur in our own conversations within the industry. Here, we're asking folks, how much attention is the institution paying to these trends? So you see at the top the demographic cliff, but also this idea that we have an increased need for personalization in marketing. We talked a little bit earlier about an institution or institutions on the marketing side trying to figure out how to differentiate. I think personalization in marketing is one piece of differentiation in that space. You can also see here down near the bottom, more interest in trades, loss of value of degrees, the different advertising restrictions for under 18s, those continue to be in flux. Use of AI by prospects scored lower than use of AI by institutions. Those you can see they are roughly in the same tier ranking. So AI is not that big on everyone's mind, but it's definitely being there. Carnegie has continued to watch that trend for students and their use of AI. It's just the speed at which it is as diffused is pretty crazy. We've definitely moved past the kind of two early adoption stages. We are now into the mass adoption stage for that age group, which is pretty amazing and probably something that's going to have a bigger impact as we continue down this road and understanding what it means for college enrollment. Here we also asked, regardless of how much your institution is paying attention to it, which trend do you think will have the largest impact? So here there are some areas. So here you can see decrease in trust and utility of higher education. This was number 3 before. It's moved into that second spot behind the demographic cliff, and not that far behind the demographic cliff. I think honestly there are some interrelated factors between this. I mean, if the demographic cliff is true, it means that we need to get as many of people to go to college as would have gone to college in those demographics in the past, if not more. And one problem with that is this potential decrease in trust or utility of higher education. We also asked, which would you consider working with a vendor to mitigate kind of that negative impact? I think it's really interesting that demographic cliff kind of goes down here, which I actually do think makes a bit of sense. We as vendors cannot do anything to stop the demographic cliff from happening. But what we can do is help you mitigate the impact of that. So I think that's something that we would definitely want to talk to you about if you're concerned about it. I do love to see the increased need for personalization in marketing, though. Carnegie has an entire system for doing that and its brand pillars. We really think personalization in marketing is one of the most important pieces to kind of surviving things like the demographic cliff and continuing to have that really strong brand presence. So definitely something to think about here. And if there is an area where you say we could really use a vendor to help with that, I'd kind of recommend looking across the different areas here and thinking, is there an area or is there a hook here that I can convince my institution that a vendor might be a good partner for this? Because it's really easy for people to kind of just say, well, we don't need help with that. This is something we're doing internally. I think there's a lot of room, though, for assistance from kind of outside sources as well. Perceived programming trends. I think this one is always interesting just because there's the difference between perceptions and reality. And what those perceptions are don't always line up with reality. I would strongly recommend you go out and you look at some of the other industry research that's been done out there with partners by, so, for example, Credo, who is now part of the Carnegie family. Very exciting. They've done a lot of great research in the programming trends area and helping that with strategic planning. There's also Gray Associates as a great resource for all things programming trends. Here we're talking about perceptions of these different trends and which of these programs do you believe are growing and successful at your institution, which I think is a really important thing to kind of key in on. What do people think is going well in their space? You see the business administration, kind of health-related professions in nursing, engineering, biology, some of what you might consider to be some of the usual suspects. Um, Programming, computer and information sciences. What I thought was interesting is psychology is relatively high here as a program that a lot of people are saying, oh, it's, it's a dying major in this way or that way. So it's really nice to see that it's doing well here in the perception of a lot of our our different constituents and the industry leaders who are taking this on. And just to see as a social scientist that there are some social sciences still seeing some of that kind of on this layer and this list of things. And the next section of this document is about budgeting and priorities of different areas within institutions. Our industry partners generally say that their institutions focus more on enrollment than they do on marketing. Here you can see you have kind of a 5-point scale again, but now the left and the right doesn't necessarily mean good or bad. It just means a focus on enrollment is those percentages to the left, a focus on marketing on those to the right, and a kind of even focus right in the middle. And as you can see, only about 7% of our respondents said that their institution focuses more on marketing than it does in enrollment. Enrollment tends to be the more tangible outcome. So again, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a surprising result, but it's one that I do think is worth some time in understanding why does that tangible result always kind of take the credibility on the importance side of things. We also have here priorities as far as locational priorities. So where are you targeting those marketing efforts? Locally, regionally, super regionally, nationally, so forth. This is lining up. I actually think this is really interesting. This lines up very similar to the percentages or data outcomes that we see when students are asked where they're interested in going to school. It's like basically about 50% say local, about 30% say regional, about 10% for super regional and national, and a few people say they want to go international. I think that's really interesting that those kind of pieces of data fit together so well. But also something to think about here as you look at your different institutional types. One thing I haven't mentioned up to this point, sometimes in these charts, you're going to see these pluses and minuses. This means that when you control for the other factors within the study, one particular breakout group may have scored statistically significantly higher or lower than others. For example, very large institutions scored statistically higher on this scale. You can see that pretty easily by looking at different percentages. So 12% of very large institutions are looking for international students, 23% national, and so forth. So you can kind of see how that differentiates with smaller institutions where less of their focus is on international and national recruiting, which just makes sense. I don't think that anyone would be surprised by that. I do think it's interesting that there is a difference regionally. So Midwest looking a little bit further, whereas institutions in the South are looking a little bit more locally, which actually makes quite a bit of sense if you look at a lot of the demographic trends going on in the country. The Midwest is seeing one of the largest attrition rates, lower amounts, as is the Northeast, though not quite as badly as the Midwest. The South is one of those areas that's actually seeing a steady supply and a lot of people moving to the South. So those changes kind of make sense there as well, that this is a group that maybe can still look more locally than other groups. For enrollment location priorities, very similar data. I won't spend too much time on this, but same kind of idea on some of these breakouts as well. Budget estimates are always kind of interesting. In the survey world, I tend to tell people surveys are really great at opinions. They're really great at perceptions. They're not always fantastic at understanding the exact amounts of something. And that comes into play when we're talking about dollars and spend. So it was really important for me when we did this research to try and get this data to be as clean as possible. We did that by putting this into part of the survey that had an alternative path. Basically, we described what we were going to ask, and if the respondent didn't feel confident in the numbers they could give, we actually skipped to the questions for them. That doesn't mean our sample size is smaller here, but I do think it means we also have cleaner data. What I also like to do anytime we are throwing large money figures into the wind, I like to pull out both the mean and the median, as well as the maximum amounts. I think it tells a fuller picture of what's going on here, because a mean can much more easily be drawn up because of a very large maximum response. Whereas a median is a little bit less volatile. I think you get more consistent kind of range results. So what you can see here for the marketing and communication function, our mean is at 1.8 million. Our median is about 750,000, and our maximum was 33 million. Now, importantly, this is outside of staffing. So this does not include your staff budget. How much are people spending on their marketing? And I think those maximums tell an interesting story as well as these medians, which I think from the median perspective, you really are seeing probably what is more potentially realistic ranges for that marketing spend, and similar on the enrollment spend. I do think it's interesting, though, that enrollment is spent on probably less than the marketing function, especially considering the earlier question where we said there was more focus on enrollment than marketing. But it appears that marketing, there's a greater spend, which might be related to the various activities you have to do for marketing to be successful. Probably costs more than to have that enrollment function be successful. But it is kind of interesting to see how those differences lay out. Similarly, what part of this kind of marketing budget or this enrollment budget is spent on specific activities? So recruitment marketing, which is arguably a big piece of enrollment as well, is a big part of that budget, as well as brand management and awareness, advancement marketing, and so forth down. Whereas the largest piece for the enrollment side is recruitment, travel, and territory management, as well as student search. So name by events and visit programs. So it's a little bit more spread around evenly, I would say, on the enrollment function side. To complement this idea of budget, we also think about structure and staffing. So who is actually functionally doing this work? We looked at marketing structures. I always think this is kind of interesting how different institutions kind of structure their marketing. The most common, or about 50% of our study respondents said that their institution uses a central marketing approach. That's the one I'm most familiar with as well. But there's also the decentralized approach where each of those units have their own teams. You have an in-house agency approach, or the one that I think is kind of most interesting is a cost recovery approach, where each unit is basically paying the marketing department to do their marketing for them. Really interesting thing. We also looked at where that function lead exists in institutional leadership. This goes back to that question of which one is considered more important in your institution. You can see that enrollment is more likely to be in the leadership cabinet level position, the head of enrollment, than is the head of marketing and communications. But you can see the differences aren't huge. It's not a huge shift, and most of the time, both of the leads of these functions are at least only one step away from being in leadership. Though at a few institutions, you can see that they're at least one extra step away. And this is kind of a breakout of that where you can see that piece. I think this is where it becomes pretty clear how the different size of an institution really impacts how that structure is going to lead and who's going to be part of that leadership function, especially on the side of enrollment. I mean, you can see 82% of small institution respondents said their enrollment function is within that leadership or cabinet level position. And so definitely differs then on that kind of reporting piece. We also asked how much interaction is there between these functions. Importantly, about 1 in 10 said marketing and enrollment is the same function at our institution. So that's always a little bit tricky. It did mean that we had to adjust some of our numbers on the other questions just to reflect, but very important to kind of understand that fact. You can also see that probably about 2/3 or more are saying that they are interacting enough or at an amount that I think would be considered pretty sufficient. There are some institutions, though, especially these 4% who say it's very rare. And even these 18% who say sometimes, I think the lack of connection between marketing and enrollment function can be a really big schism at some institutions, and one that kind of a bridge that Carnegie attempts to mend when we can, because it is so critical. It can be so valuable to make sure that those units know what the other is doing and when. So related to this, we have some staffing breakouts here. You've got full-time centrally versus elsewhere versus total in the part-time piece. So you can kind of see when you add those together, where are your totals? I would mention that here, this is kind of assumptive of how most institutions functionally have their marketing structure. So you saw that earlier that some of the marketing structures are a bit different. But ultimately, this is kind of the typical function where there's a few more folks centrally. There's a lot of kind of part-timers out there and other people who are contributing, but you have a core unit. And I think not surprisingly, the big takeaway here is the numbers get a lot larger as your institution gets a lot larger. The last section of this document, and the one that I hope that you all spend a lot of time with, is really some summary and insights from our strategy team, walking through some of the key pieces that I just walked through, how you can kind of bring together that compelling value proposition, or what some of the other kind of big strategic directions or pressures there are in the industry is something that we explain in our insights section. We also talk about how to prepare for those future challenges. Can we help you target those non-traditional audiences? How can we do that? And it really comes down to thinking about these long-term strategies and how you can kind of use that to your advantage when you're thinking about the future of higher education. And so this is something where instead of spending too much more time on our quick webinar today, I would instead just extend an invitation to you all that if you have more questions about this research, if you have more questions about what to do with it, if you are curious about how you can kind of do some of these things that we've recommended or tackle some of the challenges that the industry is facing, please get in touch with us. Carnegie is always happy to work with folks. We are here to be kind of a voice in the industry. And that doesn't just mean product work. So, obviously we're always interested in working with you directly, but we are also doing national research like this all the time. We're going to be at conferences. You're going to see us in other places. So please, please, please work with us when you need it. Get in touch when you can. We would love to be a resource for you. And I hope that this document is something that gave you at least a few ideas and gave you some things to tackle as we approach what I think is going to be kind of a really tumultuous time in the industry, not just because of the demographic cliff, but all of the other trends that we identified here, some of the political trends that we didn't have in this document. This is going to be a lot, and we want to be supportive for you. And we also hope that institutions are thinking about how to be strategic by facing these challenges head on instead of assuming that they're all going to go away. Uh, all right, that's everything I have today. I really appreciate your time. And as I mentioned, please get in touch if you have additional questions. Have a good one.